All right, we are back with the Lineup Podcast. I'm Dave Prodan here with my part-time co-host for this season. It's after hours for him, Mitch Salazar. And Mitch, we're getting you fresh from the ground in the trenches in El Salvador, where we've just completed the 7th stop on the 2024 WSL Championship Tour season, the Surf City El Salvador Pro presented by Corona and won by reigning Women's World Champion Caroline Marks and 2-time Men's World Champion John Florence. The waves were cooking and the surfing broke boundaries. Mitch, what was it like being there on the ground and calling one of the best events we've ever seen in Latin America?
Well, I think the biggest part for me, Dave, were the waves. They stood out so much. Like, third time's a charm, and I truly felt like we saw what Punta Roca was all about, right? Like, finally seeing waves from the top of the point roll all the way through to the bottom of the point. And I think the numbers don't lie in terms of the quality of excellent scores that we saw throughout the final days of competition. And especially with the 2 men in the final 2, I thought they elevated not only their performances, but really what performance surfing is based on at a right-hand point break like this. The comparison to J-Bay has been made before. We've called it the Latin America of J-Bay, but I just feel like Punta Roca showed its true faces and its true colors, its nature. And a lot of these people had to surf through different kinds of conditions too, onshore, lower tide, higher tide, and obviously having to go through the humidity and also the heat throughout every single event they were surfing throughout this one right here. But I felt like not only the surfing was elevated, but also the waves had a huge impact on their performances.
Couldn't agree with you more. Now, you and I, we always start our episodes with winners and losers. It's a segment that everyone loves. They love to hate it, whatever. However, tonight, ahead of our regularly planned segment, I want to honor a very, very special winner, not just from El Salvador, but from every event he participates in. And in addition to being an excellent commentator, surfing analyst, and podcaster, he is a lights-out surfer. But he's also a very humble surfer, which is why I was very much pleased. And I so enjoyed getting this text from our broadcast producer extraordinaire, Milby Shannon, who is a great surfer in his own right, today about our own Mitch Salazar. To quote, "You should ask Mitch about his wave from last night at La Bocana, the river mouth. He got a full sequence and 2 absolute hammer shots. The judges saw it. The commentators saw it. He looked like the Mexican Mark Acalupo. But we all know that he is too humble to talk about it himself. So, Mitch, this is why we love you. But please give the people what they want and tell us about your wave from last night first."
Well, first of all, you know that I love you, Dave, and I love our whole family on tour. Really appreciate what happens behind the scenes, broadcast-wise, everybody in the production. Couldn't, appreciate them more. And when it comes to the waves that we had here this week, it was really special. And I've been coming here for 12 years now. That was my first trip outside of Mexico to compete at a QS event. And La Bocana has been one of my favorite waves since I've been coming to this beautiful country. And it was just one of those waves to finish off the session. I had a really big layback carve on the outside, and then I comboed it up with a nice hit on the inside right there. One of the judges actually came up to me. He was like, "Hey, you fit in one more turn and probably getting an 8.5 on that wave." And it made me feel really good and appreciate it. And, I couldn't really talk enough about our team, our family on tour, and how close and tight-knit we are. And I really appreciate everybody because I don't think our audience and a lot of our viewers understand how difficult a lot of this is. Our call times at this event, Dave, we were getting there in the dark. For a lot of us, we were leaving 4:45, 5:15 in the a.m. every single morning. First event I've worked all year long, including the Spanish broadcast, where we finished within the first 4 days of the window too. So, pretty amazing stuff, but we couldn't do this without them. And I truly appreciate every single one of them. Seriously.
Well said. I'm glad that you and all the people that work on tour were able to get some waves as well. I'm so happy it was a quick event. And I'm maybe happiest that you were able to stamp the Lineup Podcast authority on your fellow commentators.
Yes, sir.
I love that. My favorite part. But all right, so we're going to park Mitch as the ultimate winner from El Salvador. Mitch, let's get into our actual winners and losers segment. Who do you got first up on the losers?
Yeah, well, it's a tough one because I like her a lot, and not only is she super consistent, she had an outstanding year in 2023, and I thought she was going to have a good event here. My first loser is Tyler Wright. Runner-up last year at this event to Caroline Marks. She won on a roll at the back end of the year, too. Got 2 consecutive second places right here in El Salvador, and then into Rio. She needs 2 big bounce-back events if she's looking to make the final 5. It's really difficult right now. I mean, if you look at the points, there's a huge difference between everybody that's on the top, and then past 6th place, Betty Lusakura Johnson, she's trailing by almost 3,000 points from Gabby Bryan, who just made the final right here. So Tyler Wright way behind in 9th, close to 6,000 points in between her and Gabby. And if you can compare it to Joanna Fay, almost 8,000 points. She's needing at least 2 finals to be able to make the final 5. I don't know if that's going to happen. I just want to see her have 2 good events to finish up the season, Dave. I wanted to be content with her surfing because in the end, we're talking about one of the most dominant surfers in the entire history of professional surfing. When she was on top in 16 and 17, she was untouchable. I mean, she was leading the rankings basically from the start of the season to the finish of them.
I agree with you. I actually have Tyler on my list. We'll get to her in a minute, but completely agree. I was surprised that she didn't put up more in El Salvador. But my first loser coming out of the Surf City El Salvador Pro is another world champ. It is Italo Ferreira. He is our 2019 world champ, and he was winner of the previous event in Tahiti. However, went from hero at Teahupo'o to 0 at Punta Roca. 1 in Tahiti and then dead last in El Salvador, going down to wildcard Brian Perez in the elimination round. He couldn't outpace Gabriel Medina in his opening round heat, and then caught a bunch of waves in his ER heat. He typically catches a ton of waves, and sometimes that works out well. But against Perez, he just couldn't do anything that made a dent the way the Salvadoran did. And at present, we now have what I'd consider a 3-way knife fight between Gabriel Medina at 6th on the rankings, Italo, who dropped down 2 spots to 7th, and then the event runner-up, Yago Dora, who bumped up to 8th. Now, objectively, any of these 3 surfers could win the next 2 events in Saquarema and in Fiji back-to-back, and I don't think anyone would be shocked. There's only 400 points separating the 3 of them, so it's very close compared to the 700 points separating Gabriel from Jordy Smith, who's in 5th, and then another 3,000 points to Ethan in 4th. So the point being is there's just not a lot of time for the 2024 Brazilian Storm to supplant the current top 5 en masse. And so we are probably looking at a situation where the 3 of them are battling Jordy and Ethan for just 2 spots, or maybe just 1 spot between the 4 of them, depending on how the other surfers do. So I think it's a lost opportunity for Italo to have kept the momentum up from Tahiti. And geez, Rio and Fiji are going to be really interesting around that 5th spot on the men's side from my perspective.
100% agreed. I was going to get into Italo as my 3rd loser, but I'll just go straight into it right now. Let's give a lot of respect and admiration to what Brian was able to do right here on his home court. First year, he's been able to compete the way he wants to. Went up against John, number 1 in the world in the opening round. I get it. That's the one guy that you're looking up to right now. He's always had to face the high seed. Ends up going in the elimination round. He's the first seed of the morning on day 2 of competition. Like, that's a lot of pressure, especially competing at home. But you'd be thinking it's going up against the local boy, right? He'd be the one with the pressure. It seemed like Italo from the get-go was extremely uncomfortable, couldn't really grasp what was going through his head, especially when it came to rhythm, as you said, likes to catch a lot of waves. I just don't understand how you go from the highest of highs to the lowest of lows literally 1 week from another. That's the one thing that I still can't comprehend with him. Luckily, he's just down to number 7. It could have been way worse than that. And that's what a victory does. It just gives you too many points in order for you to maintain your spot, at the very top of the leaderboard. So fortunately for him, has 2 events left, needs a major result in Rio, though. He can't let this go over to Fiji and expect a big result over there with the killers that we have in the top 10 right now. Yago had a huge jump, both in Tahiti and at this event right here. We're talking about Gabe, who had another semifinal finish at this location, who's never won in Brazil at the championship tour level. And of course, we can't forget about Ethan Ewing, who had a spectacular finish last year. He was runner-up. And Jordy Smith has been a champion in Rio before. You got to get things going right now, Dave. I mean, it's literally this time if you want to beat Italo and move back into the top 5.
It's well said, and he's one of those surfers and he looks like he alternates between, espresso coffees and Red Bulls, and he's always redlining, right? And when the redlining aligns with being, in rhythm and locked in like we saw in Tahiti, he's virtually unbeatable. Yeah. But you can see when it doesn't work, it burns up, and it's like, how is he losing this heat, or how is he not winning every event? And it's that double-edged sword. So I hope we see him bounce back. I think he's such an exciting surfer to have in the title hunt. And I mean, I mentioned him. You mentioned him. You mentioned Tyler. Tyler was second on my list. I'm going to give her a knock coming out of El Salvador. Entered El Salvador 9th on the rankings, exited El Salvador 9th on the rankings. So didn't lose any ground, but the opportunity cost for her, as you mentioned, on her forehand, at a right-hand point break of Punta Roca, it just seems really high, And this season, she got a second in Portugal, she got a third in Margaret River, but other than that, no real results to write home about for the two-time world champion. And you know what? Sometimes those seasons happen. Her surfing looks sharp, her equipment on the Pizels looks really good. Yep. She seems healthy, but just not getting the results you'd expect her to get in a year that doesn't have a Carissa Moore. It doesn't have a Steph Gilmore threatening for the world title. So, as you pointed out, like, she could win the next two events. There's still 20,000 points on offer. I hope she finishes on a high, because I think she is still well within her prime in terms of performance. And
what I think has happened to Tyler this year too is that the absence of both Carissa and Steph kind of have left her without a push from people from her generation either. Because
interesting.
That's just kind of how I feel. You look at Tati, a bit younger. I don't feel like Tati's ever pushed Tyler to a certain point, because when Tyler was dominant, Tati was making her debut. She was in a rookie season in 16. It took her a little while to get things going. Carissa was already there. Steph was already there. And I feel like she just has to face a lot of the newcomers, a lot of the new school surfers, and she's facing them early on. And I just don't think she's able to put herself in a comfortable position to have that success early. And she struggled. It's noticeable. She struggled. And as you said, I thought Pizel had a great event here. Derilu Sakura Johnson, John Florence, both members of finals day. Pizel's work good in these kinds of waves. So there's definitely no excuse in terms of equipment. Speaking of equipment, and somebody who I thought was going to do way better, surfed great here last year. And outside of the victory to begin the season, he's had an up and down year. A couple of 9s thrown in there. Everything else is 17th or worse. It's Baron Mamiya. And he was just outside of the top 5, gets dropped down to number 12 right here with a 17th place finish, which is pretty bad given his standards, and where he holds himself to. I just feel like there's a lot more to give. And outside of the consistency of the couple of 9s and the victory, he's really not been there. And it comes down to wave selection a lot too. Both him and Seth Moniz were trying a lot of maneuvers that weren't necessary at a point in the heat, where it was still very open for them to get back into it. And I feel like they're just getting a bit ahead of themselves, Dave. There's still a lot more to do for Baron Mamiya. Yeah, no, you and I are pretty in line on our winners and losers. I haven't gotten my La Bocana wave yet, but maybe, will open up for me tomorrow. We'll see how it goes. But similarly, I actually had a really hard time landing on a third loser from El Salvador, because the waves, as you said, they're pumping. The surfing was insane. But for my third loser, similar to you, I kind of collectively say any of the men that were in the top 10 heading into El Salvador but slid down the rankings. We mentioned Italo, but Jake Marshall dropped from 7th to 9th. Barron, who you just mentioned, dropped from 8th to 12th. Cole Hauschman from 9th to 13th. And Kanoa Igarashi from 10th to 14th. I thought, all broadcast long, I thought the likes of you, Chris Cote, Felicity Palmatier really nailed this one in the commentary booth, comparing the performances that the world's best surfers needed in Tahiti versus El Salvador. Punta Roca this year, super rippable, and a wave that any CT surfer could and should thrive at. And
those aforementioned names, they had the opportunity to let their surfing propel them ever closer to a WSL Final 5 spot in El Salvador, but the results didn't come, right? And so I just kind of look at that group as like, if you're sliding further away from the top five, at a wave like Punta Roca, when it was doing what it was doing this event, you missed the opportunity to let your surfing push you into that space.
Yes, absolutely agreed right there. The waves are too good. And as you said, a lot of people lost close heats. We saw that on Tahiti too. It's a given that's going to happen at least once or two times a year on the championship tour. Everybody's just too good. If conditions are good, you're probably going to lose a close heat every now and then. But when it comes to those people that were in the top 10, no doubt a missed opportunity. Not just that, people getting ground on them. I mean, look at Yago. He went from being the last person to make the cut to now being just outside of the top 5 too. He jumped 9 spots at this event. He's number 8 right now. I mean, that is absurd when you look at the beginning of the year he had, coming off of a quarterfinal over there in Tahiti, and now making the final right here. It is just big for a lot of those people that were well outside of the top 5, now on the verge of knocking on the door of making, you know, not only the finals at lowers, maybe getting their first world championship too. That's a major catalyst right there, Dave.
I couldn't agree with you more. Well, those are the losers coming out of El Salvador. Mitch, aside from yourself, of course, who do you have as the winners coming out of the Surf City El Salvador Pro presented by Corona?
Well, the first one's pretty obvious. Got to give it to my boy, Double J. John Florence, to me, not only demonstrated why he's number 1 in the world, he demonstrated why he's probably the most complete surfer in the world, too. And maybe the most evolved in recent years. Not only is it great to see him healthy, happy, but performing at the highest levels, Dave, it truly is something that we need to appreciate while we still have him on the championship tour. It's the first and only perfect 10 out of the event. And most importantly, he won those close heats that we're talking about too. He got pushed by Brian Perez in that round of 16 heat. He got pushed in the final by Yago. He responded both times, knew when to compete and how to compete. I love what we're seeing, and he has got a massive lead over everybody else in the rankings right now. He has already clinched his spot in the final 5.
I love it. And one more note on that too, the amount of comparisons between the waves at Punta Roca and Lower Trestles, specifically by the San Clemente crew at this event, quite up there, right? And I think I saw more than one person put out there that said, if John can win at Punta Roca, he can win at Lower Trestles. And if he's in the number 1 spot heading into September's Lexus WSL Finals, he could absolutely win the world title at Lower Trestles. And I think that's really exciting.
That's great. And not only are we seeing him do that in a consistent way, but finally getting a win after his 4th final, it's his 3rd one in a row. I mean, you know what it would have done to his confidence if he wasn't able to actually convert right here? Like, he'd be pretty bummed out. Pretty bummed out, especially when you consider how well he surfed over there in Margaret River. He was the best surfer of the event. He dropped a 10 in the semis. Then you go over to Tahiti, beats Gabe, monster Gabe in the semi over there, and then is defeated by Italo. So this was a huge performance by him, but a major pivotal moment too, given that he had never done well here before. And now we're going into 2 events that are great for him. Rio, he's won there twice. And Fiji, we all know if it's pumping, he's got to be one of the favorites going into that event right there.
I love it. Well, my first winner from the event is actually just the El Salvador surfing community. You know, I think between the waves firing at Punta Roca for the event, the ample, even before I got Milby's text today, free surfing stories from other breaks around the way, you know, the fans on the beach, and the Pink Panther performance by Brian Perez. I think El Salvador comes away as my first big winner from their own event. You know, I heard the same thing last year from people who were down there, just raving about how fun the waves are, how warm the water is, how nice the people are, how good the food is, and on and on and on. So great to see the event get good waves, see the surfing go through the roof, and the Salvadoran surfing community get the praise it deserves. You know, went on a boat trip last year for my 40th. We still have a WhatsApp group, and it was blowing up. Everyone's like, oh my God, El Salvador has got to be our next trip. So, hopefully someone listens to this and hooks us up. We'd love to go down there and check it out. But yeah, I just think it was great, man. I mean, it's awesome having such a good event in Latin America. It's awesome for local surfers like Brian Perez to show what they can do against the world's best surfers. And it's great for the sport. I'm all for it.
Oh, 100%. And a historic moment, too. First Salvadorian to win a CT heat, too, against, former champion, an Olympic champion in Mitchell, especially coming off of his first victory in 3 years. It's a big deal. And, it's not only great for this country, it's great for the surrounding areas, too. I mentioned it on the broadcast. A lot of people came from surrounding countries, Costa Rica, Panama, and obviously a lot of Mexican people made the way down, too, because they know what this event's about. It's the one that's closest to the region. They get to see the world's best surfers compete at one of the best waves in the region and worldwide. So major impact, obviously financially too. Surf City's been thriving the last few years. Really love to see the growth of this area right here, Dave. And, going into my second winter, I thought she surfed great. I think she's pushing the sport every single day. And there's an argument that could be made for her making the final too. It's Caitlin Simmers, our new rankings leader, once again. What a performance. Got to give props to Gabby, too. She surfed incredibly well. That last turn that Caitlin Simmers does on her last wave, though, might be the most high-performance turn we've seen all year long. And outside of Molly Picklam's turn at Sunset Beach, I'd have to put it up there with one of the single best turns we've seen in female surfing history. She's changing the sport from the inside out, and I feel like she's the one person that's putting everything on her shoulders to kind of make it what it is nowadays, Dave.
Oh, it's a great pick. And I thought that heat between her and, unofficial lineup team rider Gabby Bryan in the semis was amazing, and you mentioned that last turn she did on the last wave. I actually think the way that Katie's surfing on the women's tour is influencing her contemporaries on tour. Gabby Bryan is an awesome power-based, rail-based surfer. That first set wave she got in that heat, she blasted the fins loose on that first section. Now, it wasn't quite as radical as Katie's turn, but it was a bigger, meatier section, and she committed, and I thought it was amazing. I just love seeing both those surfers push each other. It was really exciting, and yeah, I mean, Katie's back in the rankings lead once again, and I'm looking forward to seeing her at lowers if she survives the next two events. Hopefully. My second winner coming out of El Salvador, we've spoken about him a little bit already, but Yago Dora. For sure, we mentioned John cementing current number one position, booking his very first ticket to the WSL finals. And we mentioned it, but winning his first CT for him in the last 1,267 days. That's how long it's been between John's CT wins until El Salvador. And that's the winner on the men's side, and he's being appropriately celebrated. But I want to use my subjective winner picks here to shine a light on Yago and his performance at Punta Roca. He's on his backhand. He's a goofy footer, so we automatically support that. But 16.64 in the opening round, 16.5 in the round of 16, 14.54 in the quarters, 17.66 in the semifinals, and a 14.44 in the final, which included the final high 9.77. Iago's style, speed, power, pace, innovation, all of it was on display at Punta Roca, and we're now heading into the event he won last year in Saquarema, as well as a venue that I think we would all consider him a danger man in at Fiji. It's just awesome to see, and I think that he is going to be a real dark horse danger draw across these next two events, and I think he's going to be uber dangerous if he makes it into the final five in September.
I couldn't agree more with that statement right there, especially when you consider how creative he is and the variety of maneuvers that he has on the backhand too. I don't think people comprehend how difficult it is, first of all, to do an air like that at a point break and at this wave that's moving so fast down the line. But to me, grabs, especially when they're technically well done, are the hardest thing in performance surfing. He did multiple of those within a single heat. Varials, indies. He tried to mute almost pulled it, went for a rodeo, had a nice attempt. And guess what? That's not even his whole bag of tricks right there, ladies and gentlemen. He's got more. So just wait till he gets to a certain wave, including lower trestles. And mark my words, I feel like if he does well in Brazil, there's no way that he doesn't get a spot in the final 5 over there in Fiji, Dave. I feel like he's on his way to superstardom this year.
And just one more tag on that too, because what you're saying I thought was very articulate. He is in no way, shape, or form just a quote unquote air guy, but he's doing the best aerials at this event. But no one thinks of him that way. Like he charges forehand and backhand. He's an amazing tube rider. He has awesome style. He is speed and power. Like he truly is the complete package. And I think his elevation at Punta Roca, for all the reasons you said, how difficult it is on your backhand to not just do those aerials, but do them with variety, mix them up with the entire repertoire he's offering. Like it was an awesome showcase for him.
Yeah. And that's actually going to lead to my third winner and probably the most important one. It's just the sport overall. Because what we saw from Yago's one thing, not only did we see the airs, the technical grabs, we saw these combined with other major maneuvers on rail too. So you do a maneuver that's rarely seen at a wave that hasn't shown up like the way it has this year. And now you combine it with other major maneuvers on rail, holding the same amount of speed, with the same amount of flow, and most importantly, with the power element too. I don't realize what kind of an impact that guy made in the span of 4 days. You know, like it's that absurd.
I agree. I mean, it was. We're fortunate this year. We're getting good waves. We're seeing great surfing, and that's kind of the whole point. And I think that's a great winner. And I know I'm probably jumping segments a little bit here, but you know, my final winner coming out of El Salvador, it's undeniable. It's Lost Surfboards. It's Matt Biolas. It's Mike Riola. It's team manager Gian Bernini. It's their whole operation. The construction of their team is so impressive. And we are going to get into it, right, in the upcoming Vissla CT Shaper Rankings segment. But the reigning CT Shaper of the year seems poised to go back-to-back on his shaping world titles this season. And it's just been so impressive to see how they're getting results from their entire team at the moment. You know, if Griffin has a down event, Crosby slides in there. You know, Yago was ascendant, as was Caroline Marks, but no Carissa Moore at this event. No problem. In comes Gabby Bryan. And I think enough cannot be said about the program they've built in recent years. The quality of the boards, the craftsmanship handled by the factory crew of glassers and sanders, the team managers, the whole nine. They're very worthy front runners at this point in the season, from my perspective.
Oh, they're winning, Dave. You sent me the text the other day of how many points are available still. There's no way they're losing this right now. Matt Biolas and Mayhem should be Shaper of the Year 2 years in a row, and they should be crowned Vissla CT Shaper Rankings champions. I'm just going to finish with this, though. I don't think we get to this point right now of what I said with my third winner of the sport getting to a certain point. We saw free surfs and heats during these 4 days of competition because equipment is so good nowadays. I mean, high-performance surfboards at a high-performance wave, but because these boards are so good, we're seeing the best surfing we've ever seen on the Championship Tour. And I fully think that 2024 has redefined the way we see a lot of these surfers not only compete, but also progress during each and every event we've seen so far this year. Just think back to Bells. I mean, who surfs that way in a final or even a semifinal the way Griff did over at the Bells Bowl? Then you look at Cole Houshman's performance. You look at this event right here. John Peisel, what he did with both John and Betty Lou was amazing. We even saw a couple great performances from people on Sharp Eyes, but it comes down to lower trestles being the epicenter of where Mayhem is located. And look at how well it's progressed, the surfing of a lot of these people on tour, because they have that one wave that can replicate everything else at a high-performance wave, like we just saw at Punta Roca. Amazing stuff. Amazing.
It's a great point. That will wrap up winners and losers from the Surf City El Salvador Pro presented by Corona. We're going to take a quick break to get a word in from our sponsors. And when we come back, more Vissla CT Shaper ranking talk. Don't go anywhere. Okay, we are back. This is the Lineup Podcast. I'm Dave Prodan here with Mitchell Salazar. It is now time for the Vissla CT Shaper Rankings update. Shaper Ranking! A quick refresher for our listeners on how we're measuring Shaper performance this season. This is the second season of the Vissla CT Shaper Rankings, where we determine the Shaping World Champion. The rankings is a combined men's and women's rankings, and we count all surfers finishing in the quarterfinals or better, and the shapers receive the same rankings points that correlate to their respective surfer finishes. The higher the surfer places, the more points the shaper receives. So we have been tracking the Vissla CT Shaper Rankings from Pipeline. We have 2 more events to go. We will go through Saquarema and Cloudbreak, and we will crown the 2024 Vissla CT Shaper of the Year winner before the Lexus WSL Finals in September. In addition to being honored the CT Shaper of the Year at the WSL Awards, the winner of this year's Vissla CT Shaper Rankings will also be gifted an overnight stay at the Surf Ranch Lemoore, courtesy of Kelly Slater Surf Ranch and the WSL, and dare I say the Lineup Podcast. But that's neither here nor there. When the dust had settled on the Vissla CT Shaper Rankings post Surf City Pro El Salvador presented by Corona, we talked about this already in Winners and Losers, but it was Matt Biolis and Lost Surfboards not only maintaining their roughly 30,000 point lead that they've held over the past 2 events, but extending it a further 50%. They're now sitting 45,250 points ahead of current number 2 Sharp Eye on the rankings. And the points in El Salvador, we mentioned, they came from Crosby Colapinto, Yago Dora, Gabriella Bryan, and Caroline Marks. Mitch, you are a Lost Surfboards team rider. What the hell is going on with this program this season?
It's like I told you before, they have lowers as their backyard. It's the most high performance and most consistent wave on the planet regarding that. And it's just the perfect training ground for a lot of these boards that Matt Biolis and his team are making. I think the Driver 3.0 might have been the most used board this entire week. And the major moment really here for them was that they had 3 finalists. There's a big difference in points between quarters, semis, and then you make the final. So they have the champion back-to-back on the women's side, Caroline Marks. We all knew that she was going to have a great event. That's not really a surprise. When we spoke a few episodes ago about Gabby Bryan, we both said, or you asked me, who do you think is going to be outside of the top 5 in the next few events? Do you think anybody's going to be relegated? I told you Gabby, my honest opinion, right? And you even agreed with me. She made a big bounce back here. She's still number 6, but I wouldn't consider it impossible for her to still make lowers. You know, I think Rio, if the waves are good, could make at least the quarters right there. Fiji should be a good event for her. You match power with power right there. But now you have not only a great men's team, you also have an incredible women's team. And that's really where we've seen Sharp Eye and a lot of the other shapers really struggle. They haven't had big performances on their women's side, including Joanna faced poor performance here, given her standards and where she is in the rankings. And of course, Tati West and Webb too. But on the men's side, Leo still hasn't been able to make it out of that rough drought that he's in. Jack Robinson did make the quarterfinals, but I truly think there's a lot more to get from Rio Waida. I think Jake Marshall has had an incredible year, but you need to get him into a semifinal eventually. Still hasn't been able to break that barrier of making the quarters or getting 9th place finishes throughout the entire year. It's consistent, but if you're one of these shapers, Paizel, Channel Islands, Sharp Eye, you need to be making finals and winning events, Dave, in order to compete with Mayhem.
Yeah. And ever since we launched this last season, right, we talk about, look, it's not all apples to apples. We've got, 18, 20 different shapers that support the world's best surfers year in and year out. And there's different tiers in terms of program sizes and in terms of how the shapers are structuring their companies and what they can afford to invest in. And, when you look at the Vissla CT Shaper rankings, both Lost Surfboards and Sharp Eye, they're more or less within the same tier in terms of size. They both started the season before Pipe with 10 surfers on the championship tour, so it's not really a huge surprise that they're number 1 and number 2. And certainly, Sharpeye is suffering from not having reigning 2-time world champion Felipe Toledo on tour this season. But you could also argue that Lost Surfboards doesn't have Carissa Moore producing for them either.
True.
DHD, they started the season with 8 surfers, so they were probably, you'd consider them up in that sort of upper tier of program sizes. And they still have a strong team post-relegation on the CT, but they're not really producing in the same way that we expected them to, despite having, Liam O'Brien, Connor O'Leary, Ethan Ewing on the men's team. They haven't collected a result on the men's side since Bell's Beach. No one's made the quarterfinals, which is really surprising. And they only have Molly Picklum on the women's side at the moment, and she is producing for them, but it's just not enough. And Mitch, Darren Handley, DH, he was so passionately fired up about having a crack at the Shaping World title this season, but it just hasn't panned out for them. They're currently outside of the top 5. What do you think is going on with some of these programs that are maybe in that upper tier? Channel Islands and Paizel and TNC Surf, they're all sort of hovering in that space too. They don't have as big a teams, but it's just really insane to me how, Lost Surfboards came in last year. It was a big race between DHD, Sharpeye, and themselves. They ended up winning out. Start of the year, we saw Sharpeye in the lead. We saw DHD take the lead at one point, but Lost Surfboards just ran away with it. What's going on with these sort of challenger programs at the moment?
Well, first things first, Darren loved to talk smack last year. You saw him at the Surf Ranch. Guy wanted his yellow jersey, and Matt, remember when they had him on the broadcast, he was like, yeah, I don't really care about the yellow jersey, to be honest. But deep down, he does. Deep down, he does. People care, ladies and gentlemen. We had Marcia Zuvi on site right here. Britt Merrick was present too. But just to answer your question, it's the lack of people in the top 5 on both sides. Like Darren has Ethan Ewing, but as you said, he's had struggles recently. Given he's lost some close heats, the one in Tahiti against Kelly, where the 11-time world champ literally got him in the last few seconds of the heat with the Hail Mary. But I think it all starts with somebody at the top. So they need to get Ethan going. He's made the final before in Rio. That was last year. Needs to do super well in Fiji to maintain his spot within the top 5. But I just don't see any of those guys really competing with the top 2 spots, Lost and Sharpeye. If anybody actually has a chance out of those that you mentioned, I actually think it's Paizel. To me, Paizel, you say Tyler gets on a roll right here in the last 2 events, at least makes the semifinals. That's a good bunch of points. You get Sakura to maybe sneak into the top 5 too, make finals day, both appearances. And if John, say it's not impossible, but it's also very difficult for it to happen. If he makes both finals or wins both of them, that's radical. That's like a major jump right there, especially if you're eliminating guys who are at the very top of the Vissla CT Shaper rankings too. I'm talking Griffin, I'm talking Cole, I'm talking Crosby, and for Sharpeye, said it before, Jack Robinson, he's already won 2 events. What else do you want him to do? Win 4, win 5? Like Jake Marshall needs to get going too. Where's Leo? Like all these guys need to put in the work too, because especially if you're paying these guys big bucks, getting them the best boards in the world, they need to make them count. They need to make these results count.
It's a great point. And even looking at the breakdown, men's and women's results this year for the Vissla CT Shaper rankings, Lost Surfboards is sort of that tier 1 program that consistently puts up results pretty much across all 7 events. But there's a lot of those second tier and third tier programs that are eating as well, right? On the men's side, Arakawa has 20,000 points on the back of Jack Robinson's wins at Super Tubos and Margaret Rivers. That's 20,000 points that could have gone to Sharpeye. Jack Robinson rides Sharpeyes as well. Yep. Italo Ferreira, wins in Tahiti. He's on a Timmy Patterson. He's their only team rider on tour. Gabriel Medina's woken up. He's been getting results the last couple of events on Cabiancas, and so I think that's part of it, where it's like, if and I should say also on the women's side, right? You've got Katie Simmers on Borst Designs. She's the only team rider on that program. And Brisa Hennessy's the last remaining surfer on TNC Surf. Her performances are keeping them in the top 5 right now. So I think it's one of those things where if you are a tier 1 program, if you are a DHD, if you are a Sharp Eye, if you are, let's even say Channel Islands to a degree, even though that's a smaller team, or a Lost, you have to be getting those consistent results at every event.
Right.
And it just feels like Lost is the only program that has done that this year compared to the other ones.
That is absolutely right. And I think for Borst and Johnny Cabianca, you have two surfers that are outliers. I don't think they really count in terms of, people that would even be on a super team and still stand out. Kalen Simmers, Gabe Medina, those are two people that are arguably the best surfers in the world. So not blaming anybody for not being able to get them because they've committed to their craft. We've said it before, support your local shaper, but I like the dedication that we're seeing. And it's obvious that the boards are working for them too. They've had incredible results all season long, especially Caitlin with a couple of victories, but it's time for Gabe to win an event too. And he hasn't won an event.
For sure.
Yeah, he is. Yeah. 2 semis in a row. And not that he was surfing bad at this event either. I mean, he just lost to Yago.
He looked awesome. Yeah.
Most amazing surfer that we've seen all year long in terms of performance. I just think that, given his poor results in the past in Rio and his struggles at the championship tour level right here, I think this is really the time to do it. Get back into the final 5. Don't go into Fiji needing a result. Rather go into Fiji defending one of those top 5 spots. So Johnny Cabianca, well and present in the Vissla CT Shaper rankings. Also want to say, I know we always give Britt Merrick and the Channel Islands crew a lot of love right here, given they've always been great to everybody and they've always been some of the raddest people on the planet. Britt's been at almost every event this year. And he is so involved with his surfers, whether they're doing good or they're doing bad. When Matt McGillivray paddled out for the semifinal, he gave him a big hug and just told him, I'm proud of you regardless of the result. Thank you for riding my boards. And to me, that kind of level of personal relationship, intimacy between a shaper and a team rider is crucial to not only the way they perform, it's crucial to the way they live their lives. And I'm a huge fan of it. I think we should see a lot more of it. Mark Suzuki was also present at this event and Matt Biolos too. But I haven't seen any other relationship or any other interactions like the ones I've seen with Britt Merrick and his team.
Yeah, that's a great note. And related, it was awesome to see Zhao Xianca back. He's a CI team rider. He's riding his own sort of custom remix model. Zhao suffered a very serious head injury at Pipeline before the season started. His recovery has been, being monitored throughout the year. He's still wearing a helmet when he competes and surfs. He looked incredible. But I love the note you made. And I do think that's one of the best things about this program is we get to talk about every program in the Vissla CT Shaper rankings, regardless of size. We get to celebrate Chris Borst, Timmy Patterson, Johnny Cabianca, as well as Marcio Zuvia. I know that Marcio has, San Diego superstar surfer Taylor Clark. He was down there, and he's shaping a bunch of boards for Sharp Eye too. So it's just very cool to see everyone in the mix. Mitch, you mentioned the Driver 3.0 from Lost Surfboards was probably one of the most, if not the most used model by the CT surfers in El Salvador. Were there any other themes that you noticed? Fin configurations, epoxies versus polyurethane, anything else that stood out to you from a shaping perspective at Punta Roca?
This is a really good sound. When you hear the sound, it's usually something good. I got another visual for you. These are Jack Rabo's fins, his signature model. Really good fin to use at any kind of condition, but I would especially say at a point break like that. Good amount of flex, very balanced. So continuous drive, the control speed well, get off of the pivot, off of the bottom. This was what a lot of the surfers were riding over there, this kind of template. Also, DHDs were a big factor over here, something with a bit more control. I personally like this fin a lot, though. I've been riding this the whole week, and especially today. We went to Punta Roca and surfed after the comp ended, which was really nice. Just to give you a visual right there. Sakura was on a Paisel Ghost, which I thought looked amazing. Good Pacific connection between the Hawaiian shapers and right here in Central America. A lot of power. We've seen Hawaiians do super well at the QS level right here at Punta Roca. I thought that board looked great. John Johns was a modified White Tiger. So just a bit more rocker and a bit more curve in the tail allowed for that quick release coming off of it. He had not only the 10-point ride, but some of the highest scores of the event. I would say for Sharp Eye, we saw a diversity of boards. HT2, which is the Holy Toledo 2. We saw the 77 be used quite a bit. Cano was using his Storms model, which is a really good high-performance shortboard. But for a lot of surfers, especially those riding the Gyro 3.0, it went to the round tail. So a bit more drawn in towards the tail, a lot more control, but just as much pivot as you would get on a squash. I would say, though, between FCS and Futures, it seemed like the majority of the surfers were just allowing for a lot of speed control rather than speed generating, just because this wave has so much push down the line. So we saw a lot of Mick Fannings being used, which is one of FCS's most successful fins. And on the Future side, I mentioned Robos. I thought John John's Tech Flexes were something that we're super used to, which are a really stable fin. But I think overall, it just came down to a lot of the surfers that wanted to have that control down the line rather than have more speed being drawn off of the bottom, Dave.
I love it. Great insight. Final question for the Vissla CT Shaper Rankings before we go. What board were you on last night when you were giving everyone whiplash out at La Bocana?
I was riding a Stub 3.0. I should have brought my driver, though. I felt like that probably would have been the better board to ride out here. The Stub is more of a beach break center board, but because I knew we were going to stay closer to La Bocana, I was going to be surfing here more often. So this wave acts both as a beach break and kind of as a river mouth wave. Like if you've ever surfed in Papara in Tahiti, it's kind of like a really similar wave to that, like a more powerful version of lowers. So board worked great. I had an Uber driver as a backup. I didn't end up riding it just because I thought this board worked awesome. But I would have liked to have had my driver 3.0. I think it would have maybe fit a bit better in the pocket and maybe would have a bit more control off of the bottom too.
Right on. Well, there are only 2 events remaining this season in the Vissla CT Shaper Rankings. There are still 195,000 points left. So anything can happen.
It ain't happening, Dave. It ain't happening.
I'm with you. It's unlikely. But a program is really going to have to step up and challenge Lost Surfboards as soon as possible if they're going to make a run at the title before 2024 is over. This wraps, our Vissla CT Shaper Ranking segment for the Lineup Podcast. We're going to take another break to get a word in from our sponsors. And when we come back, we will answer the listener questions.
All right, guys, welcome back to the Lineup Podcast. That is the CSO of the World Surf League, Dave Prodan. I'm Mitchell Salazar, and welcome back to the Lineup. Of course, as always, if we don't get to your question this week, we'll do our best to get back to you in our DMs. First question this week, Dave, as always, appreciate our fans and our listeners from @IDaneLad. Tough question to open up with. I'm not going to lie. What do you think about the interference called on Griffin in the heat with Joao?
Yeah, this got the social media fired up for sure. I'm not there. I'm curious to get your take on it too, Mitch. But like from what I saw, it seemed pretty cut and dry. Paddling interference, unfortunately, by Griffin. Based on the way the rule's written. Zhao, as he sort of said post heat, certainly seems like he forced the issue. But it is all within the rule book. And so I think that you saw 2 sides of the debate really fire up. Like you get people on the Griffin side of things that are going, was that really an interference? Well, yes, it was. It's like, well, that seems a little bit dirty. It's like, well, maybe you're right, but it's also within the rules. And then people on Zhao's side are defending it, saying like, this is competition. You do anything you can to win. If Griffin created that opening, then that's on him kind of thing. So I can see both sides. I think the call was right per the rule book, but it ended up being an amazing heat. Like Griffin rallied back and surfed insane, and obviously the result has quite an impact on his season. So it was an important moment. But Mitch, you were there actually watching it happen in person. What did you think immediately when it happened, and then what was the vibe around the event site in the aftermath?
Well, when I first saw it, and you can hear my reaction if you go back to the Keynote Analyzer too, I was like, oh, wow. It's like, why? Why would you put yourself in that position, especially that early on in the heat? Like, it frustrates me so much when people are like, oh, but like he didn't force it, like it wasn't intentional. Dude, then why are you even doing it? Like, that's the real point right there. And as a judge, you're obviously not thinking about that. You just want to get the right call, but he impeded him from getting the wave. And I know Joao forced it a little bit. You kept him off of the wave, though. It's an interference. Like, it's as clear as night and day. And what I just don't understand is that he didn't realize the valuable and the precious position he was in heading into the event and how the impact this result is going to have on the rest of the season. Because I almost feel like number one in the world is out of the question right now for Griff. I don't think anybody's going to be able to overtake John on these next two events, and he's going to have to settle with another seeding outside of that. And I don't know if that's good for him or bad heading into lowers if he's able to make it over there, Dave.
It's a great point, you know, and he's almost, you would almost, the Venn diagram of like surfer psychology, you would almost look at someone like him and Italo to overlap a little bit, even though they're almost diametrically opposed in terms of their approach, right? As we said about Italo, like he is constantly redlining, he's fueled by espresso coffee and Red Bulls, and his surfing is insane. Griffin in recent years has been very candid about his meditation practices. He is lights out when he's on, but maybe at certain points, you know, he risks being on the wrong astral plane, you know, and you see that in the results. It's not this consistent. You can look at someone like a John, right? Where even though this was his first win, he has been an assassin all season, so mentally sharp, so physically sharp. And I think that's the difference. And we have seen Griffin at the WSL finals, at lower trestles, surf incredibly, but also come up short, right? If he's not in the number one spot. And as you said, he might not be in the number one spot. So he looks like he will be a challenger coming in again, unless something drastic happens over these next two events. And I don't know how that bodes for him, you know, at lower trestles. So it's a great question. And I think, as we said, it's a question that is easy to answer in terms of, yes, it was the right call, but the ramifications of that moment on Griffin's season and on the season of everybody on tour is huge.
Yeah, and just to get into the technical details of the interference too, Joao had the outside, right? He's looking for the inside positioning right there. You can't snake a surfer. The rule set or the rule book establishes that just because it's not something that you would want you to happen to you in a free surf. Like, it's just not cool. It's basically gentleman's rules at the beginning of the heat, right? So if you're trying to take the inside by coming from in and Joao's already on the outside, then he basically has better position to get to the peak. So he took it away from him, basically blocked him, didn't give him a direction to be able to go into and actually potentially catch the wave. Clear interference right there. It was good that Renato was able to explain it on the broadcast too, but I just hope that it doesn't have huge ramifications on the season. It would suck given how good of a season he's been having too. But just to go back to the comparison right there, I like that you brought John up because that guy's been in 4 finals already. He's only won 1, but he's never let that bring him down though. And I'm hoping this doesn't bring Griffin's performances down in the next 2 events. On the contrary, I want to see him bounce back from this, Dave. I hope that's the case in these next 2 events, especially in Rio.
Totally.
So our second question, sorry we got a little heated right there, but kind of an intense question to start off on.
I love it. That's a good
listener segment. Our second question from @FisherBalf, big time pod listener right here. Thanks, Fish. Week's question. Ooh, was Mitch's the best call of the year so far?
Yes, that's easy to answer. It was my favorite. That was, you know, during one of John's performances. And I mean, I'd say this, like across the board, like, I mean, it's so easy to nitpick commentary when you've never had to do it. It's such a difficult job. It's so difficult to find the right balance of informing the audience, not over talking, like letting the ambient sound come in, letting people digest what's happening, not saying the wrong thing, making sure you've got the research right. Like there's so many elements to getting it right. And I just think everyone's been so buttoned up this year on the balance part. It's been really, really enjoyable, and the surfing has really spoken for itself. And I do think that because we've hit a good balance there, because we've been fortunate to have good waves, because the surfers have taken those good waves and elevated, it's created space for these emotional moments. And yeah, I love it. Like, it's just a visceral reaction to being like, oh my God, we're seeing the best surfing, agnostic of whether someone's wearing a jersey or not, in the live arena of CT competition. That's exciting.
It truly is, especially with the quality of the waves that we had this week too. Like, so awesome. And, you know, first of all, thank you. I appreciate the recognition right there, but it's hard to contain myself sometimes just by seeing like what we're seeing on screen, and especially getting to witness it live too is a whole nother thing to it. I truly would emphasize that seeing these guys and the women at this point in time has been one of the most special things I've not only done with my career, but just within my life too. And really fortunate to be able to be part of it. But seeing that wave live was freaking radical, dude. Like, holy smokes. Like, the way he comes out of that alley-oop straight into the next carve and then like gets 2 turns after that. Him and Yago went to a different stratosphere in this event. I was so ready for it and so pumped for it. Ah, man, I'm just so stoked to be part of surfing right now, Dave. It's like I'm fanboying out, but literally, I know Milby sent you that text and whatnot about me ripping, and I appreciate that, but these men and women are freaking on another level right now. It's not even close to what we saw 5-10 years ago. I feel like there's such a small gap between those that are in the 20s into the top 5 right now. I feel like the gap is so minimal, and you maybe see John and Gabe at a certain level of difference. Outside of that, though, I don't know if I've ever seen a tour being so contestable and so difficult to succeed at.
Yeah, no, it's a great point. And yeah, that alley-oop to me had shades of, you know, John did one and at Karamas in 2013 at the Oakley Pro Bali. And the height maybe wasn't quite the same. I think Karamas was on a bigger wave. But in terms of what you're talking about and the progression of the world's best surfers, you know, Karamas, he does it, he sticks it, it's a 10, everyone loses their minds. This one, it was beautifully executed and so high and in transition. And then he moves into just lacerating the rest of the wave. Like, and that's, I mean, I guess we're talking 10 years, but it's the same surfer and there are no signs of slowing down. In fact, it's only ramping up, you know, and everyone's getting so much better. It's really exciting.
Yeah. I mean, I'm just stoked. I'm like, I can't stop smiling because I like replayed in my mind. And then I think of Yago's indies. I think of Yago's varials. I think it was a 7.67 that he had to begin the quarterfinals too. That was radical. He had a full rotation on the wave right there. And dude, I'm excited for the next 2 events. I have no idea in hell what's going to happen, but I think it's going to be an amazing finish to our season right here. All right, let's get to our next question, our final one, because if not, we're just going to fanboy out once again. At Chris.Fowler.187. Something huge has clicked into place on tour this year. What is it, though, and why?
Yeah. I mean, it's hard to say what maybe they're identifying. It's probably a lot of what we're talking about, to be honest. But, I mean, look, like, I mean, the championship tour and the people that work so hard on it at every level, like from the engine room in designing and laying out, the commissioners and you know the leadership team to the operations managers, to our regions on the ground, to people who get up early in the morning and stay out late at night just to make sure that this can be delivered to people for free. Like, everyone wants this to be the platform for the world's best surfing. That is, if you had to say we have a product, that's it. You know, and I think everyone works really hard to put the very best platform in place. And that includes making sure that we have the right infrastructure, that we have the right investment, that we're going to an international calendar of venues, and that these venues, as we've talked about so much on this podcast, are not all the same exact wave, but they're all world-class in their own way. I think last year we talked about it a lot. I think consistently in my winners and losers, I was nailing, La Nina or El Nino or whatever the hell I was upset about. But we were in that transition season of a La Nina moving into an El Nino cycle. And it really messed with weather patterns worldwide, not just obviously our surf tour, but everywhere. And it wasn't that we had the wrong events in the wrong time of year. It was just an off year, right? And we didn't have the best waves last year. This year's almost been the opposite. Not every day and not every event's been perfect, but comparatively, the waves have pumped. I think that does so much. I think we're seeing a generational shift on the men's and women's tour. And even the surfers that have been at the apex of these tours, as we've just talked about, are surfing better than ever. So you have this exciting energy in terms of talent on tour, matching up to great waves broadly that we've seen so far. The performances are awesome. And then I think, again, everyone's going to interpret their job at the WSL differently. And I like to think of it as we get to be these stewards of this platform for the world's best surfing. And that's a really cool thing. I think that has to come with quite a lot of humility as well. And I think part of that is not making it about yourself and getting out of the way and really celebrating these men and women and these stories that happen on this platform. And I think that we've seen a lot more of that collectively on tour this year from the social media team, from the broadcast team, from the comms team. It is about the surfers. It is about the surfing. And yeah, I guess that's a long way of answering it. I don't think it's one thing that's clicked into place this year, but it is operating the way it's supposed to operate and the way it is intended to operate for decades.
Yep. Mentioned a lot of great points right there. And I think majority of them have to do with the success that we've seen so far this year, especially the waves.
Totally.
This might be, something that a lot of people probably won't agree on, but I think it's 100% certain and it has to be true to a certain point. To me, it's the cut. It's the cut because look at how exciting the first half of the year was and look at how appreciative everybody is of their job after the cut right now. There's a smaller sense of pressure. There's less stress. We have people competing from number 1 in the world to number 20 for a spot in the top 5. And as Yago has proved, you can do that in 2 events. You can do that in 2 events. Same thing for Gabe. And on the women's side, it's better than ever. They're pushing each other like there is no tomorrow. I mean, Gabby Bryan, another final. Tyler Wright, 2-time world champion. She's number 9 in the world. Not even remotely close to make it into the final 5. And guess what happened? People get complacent after making the cut. They're like, I can take a step back if I want to. I don't have that pressure anymore. But guess what happened before Margaret River? Everybody was thinking about their jobs, about their careers. I just think nowadays, especially after already having several years of it, people comprehend how to not only manage the pressure, do it within a span of 5 events. And I think it's getting to a point where people are beginning to comprehend, especially those who have been on tour for a good amount of years.
It's a good point. And I think you're right to highlight that it is controversial, right? I mean, you can almost set your watch by it. Probably not a single CT surfer at the start of the year likes the cut.
No.
Nobody likes looking at it and going, I might get 5 events. I might only get a part of the season. And that extends to their entourages, their managers and their sponsors and the fans to an extent. Oh, my favorite surfer didn't make the cut. I don't like it. But the balance on that is exactly what you've laid out. Before we instituted the cut and the relegation, there was unquestionably a collective performance doldrum in the middle of the calendar, right? Because you get a big spike at the start of the season. Everyone's fired up. They want to win. At the end of the season, they go, we're at the pointy end of the season. It's business time. I got to get my job done. You see a big spike of performance then. And then it's kind of this malaise in the middle because there weren't stakes. Now, the cut exists for quite a lot of reasons, not just for stakes, but I think one of the results of it is what you've pointed out. The surfing's never been better across the board. And that's a great thing, but it's a tricky one, but I think it's a great question, and I'm glad that people think that this season's clicking into place. I will say that having done this for 20 years, like so much of it comes down to good waves, and we used to say this all the time. I think most of it's still true, but it's like you can have the very best organized event in the history of surfing. You could have fully staffed and beautifully catered lunches and, elite level broadcasts and all this investment. And if you get skunked on waves, it's the worst event ever.
None of it matters.
At the same exact time, it can be an absolute shit show circus behind the scenes. People are barely surviving, getting the event off the ground. We're rubbing 2 coconuts together to get an internet signal. And if the waves are pumping, it is the best event that's ever happened. So much of it does come down to waves. But I do think there's a lot of work that leads up to putting ourselves in a position to get the good waves too.
100%. And look at what the cut's done outside of just the championship tour as well. It's put a lot more pressure, and it's made the Challenger Series a lot more exciting. It's given the people in the regional QSs an opportunity to eventually qualify for the Challengers, be part of major broadcasts, get their name out there, obviously get the exposure that they're looking for once they make it to the CT2. People know their names before they make it to the CT because of the cut, because we have these major broadcasts at the Challenger Series event. I know a lot of people, including myself, aren't the biggest fan of it for a certain reason. But when it comes to excitement of surfing, it's the best thing that could have happened to it in the last 5 years. And it's tough to say. It truly is, especially as somebody who tried to qualify for the championship tour. I wouldn't want to go through it, but it is what it is. And it's elevated our sport, whether people like it or not. It truly has been a major catalyst in the last 4 years.
For sure. Well, great questions, as always, from our listeners. And if we didn't get to your question on the podcast, please keep sending us messages, comments at the Lineup Pod on Instagram. We do our best to respond to everyone. We always enjoy talking to the fans. And Mitch, thank you so much for staying up late and recording this. Safe travels tomorrow. And I look forward to catching up with you real soon and certainly back on the podcast after the next event in Rio.
Yeah, I appreciate you, Dave. Thank you very much. And I appreciate all of our listeners. Thanks, guys.